Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the 94 by 50 podcast brought to you by yours truly, Ilya Kurbanov. Today, I'm joined by Sean Stoqua, a former product of the Axemen men's basketball and football, past dual athlete, also representing the University of Ottawa in the past as well, the Giggies in men's basketball. And sometimes in the past year, as far as I know, definitely played some pro ball in Armenia in League A, a shooting guard. There's a lot of great numbers, but I'm not going to get into that. I think numbers speak for themselves when you have a body of work like Sean does. First and foremost, thank you for joining me today, Sean. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man, and thank you for having me. I appreciate the time. Appreciate you giving me this platform to share some of my experiences and a little bit of my story. So excited to be here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, when there is a story to tell, it should be told. And that's what I live by. And that's kind of what motivates me, just telling stories. Like, I don't have to, it's not really about me. It's more about who I have on my show. But we'll start slightly from the beginning. We don't need to get into it too much for those out there wondering, Sean's body of work is definitely out there. It AUS champion in both football and basketball. Led the AUS in 3-point percentage. Numbers speak for themselves. But it's coming from the work. And I'll ask you. I know your dad played in the CFL. How much did his body of work impacted what you were able to achieve as a dual athlete, and then obviously becoming a professional basketball player?
Yeah, man. So that's a great question, and I think there's two aspects to that question in terms of like both his body of work, like what he did kind of before I was ever born, as well as my other ancestors too who played pro sports. So I'll touch on that a little bit, and then also kind of what he was able to do for me after I was born. So just to backtrack a little more, so my dad played for the Ottawa Rough Riders, 1980 to 1986 as a receiver, and my great grandparents, so my on my mom's side, her dad, so my grandfather, played for the Ottawa Rough Riders as well. More when it was like American football, still a little bit of rugby, kind of mixed together in like the 40s.
That goes
Um,
way back. Wow.
yeah, and then his dad, again on my mom's side, so this is the Gilmores. He played for the Ottawa Senators and won a Stanley Cup in 1904. And he had two other brothers on that team, and I still think they're the only three brothers to ever be on the same Stanley Cup winning team. So like when my mom was growing up, she would have the Stanley Cup on her like dining room table when it was like still relatively small back in like you know what I mean, and like back
It's like a ball, yeah.
yeah. So I always thought that was really cool, and I think knowing that, even though, for example, like even though those guys, sure, they were athletic back then, but back then, like being a professional athlete was a little bit more about like money and opportunity and like privilege kind of thing, not necessarily like who the best athletes are. So I kind of kept that in mind. But that being said, having these pro athletes on both sides of my family, so both like DNA coming from my father's side, DNA coming from my mom's side, that always gave me the belief in myself that like, hey, I have what it takes to play professional sports, and maybe not just one, but maybe like whatever one I want. You know what I mean? Because they're playing hockey, they're playing football. So like that was one thing that I think I was just really blessed with, is that like I just had this belief in myself because of who my ancestors were and what they had done. And and you know what I mean? Maybe they weren't even that athletic and it was more about money and privilege and that's why they were good, but I still had that belief, so it still worked. And then of course, once I was actually born, having my dad there to mentor me in real life and teach me all the lessons that he learned playing professional sports and playing sports growing up. He was a basketball player as well as a football player, so he was able to coach me through both sports a little bit growing up. Although I didn't start football until later, but yeah, he was always a really positive influence for me, and he was hard on me. Don't get me wrong, but that really helped me out down the road in terms of just like being prepared for the situations that arose and the different difficulties in terms of injuries and stuff like that. So really grateful for all the mentorship that my dad was able to provide me for sure. And sometimes you don't see it pay off until like years down the road, right? But really helpful in terms of, I would say, like the mentality side of things. Like I remember driving to a basketball, I think it was a tryout, and I remember being like a little nervous. I think I was 13 years old, and I remember my dad talking to me about like what I was thinking about going into the tryout, and I remember him just saying like, you need to think about, or you need to think like, hey, I'm gonna kick this guy's ass. Like no like beating around the bush, no like, hey, maybe I do well. I just remember him being like very straight up, like, hey, here's how you should think, or here's how you should approach this. And that was I still remember that because I was like relatively young, but I remember no one had ever really told me that before, you know what I mean? But coming from him, that really made a difference, and just things like that really helped contribute to my approach to sports over the years.
Yeah, and you said, your dad was able to teach you like many valuable lessons, and I'm sure, a lot of kids could say that about their parents. Would you be able to share, like, I don't know, an anecdote? Maybe tell us a little story of a lesson. Like, I know that you said like confidence. Confidence is really key, regardless of how hard you work. You're not confident to play, come in and get and be ready for the challenge. Nothing is going to work out, regardless of how good you are. Would you mind like bringing like maybe a lesson to light of the audience and tell them what it's like?
And in terms of like one from my dad kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a story I like to tell, and this isn't necessarily like super direct, but this is a good example of just kind of the stuff I was doing growing up. I do like a lot of yard work, and when I say that out loud, I'm like, this it probably doesn't compare to what some other people do, but for me, it felt like a lot, and that was oftentimes like my dad encouraging me to do that. And I know, and after like looking back on this a little bit, some people think that's actually like a technique a lot of parents use to like instill some sort of like work ethic in their kids, right? Is like get them outside doing some chores essentially. And I just remember like being maybe in the 10th grade, and my dad gave me like a little piece of cardboard to work on resealing some of the little divots in our driveway. Like I wasn't resealing the whole thing with a piece of cardboard, but like little pieces of it. Being on my driveway on my hands and knees, like sealing up part of the driveway with this piece of cardboard. And my neighbors were driving by and they stopped and they were like, "Oh, like that looks like it's pretty shitty. Like, what did you do? Like, what did you do wrong to deserve this punishment?" Kind of thing. And I was like, "I didn't do anything wrong." like this, and then it kind of clicked for me. It's like, okay, other people are viewing this stuff that I'm doing just like normally day to day, week to week as like punishment. You know what I mean? But for me, I'm just like already used to this and this is kind of normal. So I think like my dad just putting me in those situations consistently really kind of raised my level of mental toughness, if you will, where I was just able to like deal with a bunch of bullshit and not really even view it as like work or as punishment or as even something negative. You know what I mean? And over time, I grew to actually see those circumstances or those opportunities as an opportunity to grow and just an opportunity to get used to doing things you don't necessarily enjoy doing, right? So that was one thing. I remember another story, for example, being getting positive reinforcement for going to play outside, like when it was very rainy. My dad, like during the summertime, whatever, he's still going to work. But remember one time he came home and he knew that it had been raining all day, but he asked me if I still got my work in or whatever. And then he was, he gave me some positive reinforcement for that. Sometimes we'd go to we'd do some workouts when I was younger. Like I had an older sister, 2 years older, and we'd do some workouts when I was a bit younger, say like 8, 9 years old in the driveway. He would put me and my sister through different drills, like standing under the rim, working on spinning it off the backboard, both sides, things like that at a pretty young age, right? And I think that stuff kind of helps you retain some of that stuff over the years. And he would reward us by taking us to like Dairy Queen or something like that. So those are some of my earlier memories with my dad kind of just training me and exposing me to some things, trying to help me work on my jump shot, always encouraging me to get more arc on my jump shot. And sometimes you got to hear this stuff too from other people, right? Like you can only hear this stuff so much from your parents. So it was nice too, like seeing some of the stuff he was right about in hindsight, but I had to hear it from somebody else like later down the road to actually implement it. That would be a good one. What else? I don't know, man. He was just so supportive. Like another story I remember is in high school football. Like we had a fight against Immaculata after one game, and we were supposed to play them at Immaculata the next game. And the league is like, no, it's not happening. Like we're not letting you go to their school after you guys just had a brawl for another game. Like it's not going to end well. So I remember our game was at Nepean Sportsplex, a neutral field in the middle of Ottawa, and there was no fans allowed. And there was cops at the game. Somehow my dad showed up and still got in. He was the only fan like watching the game. You know what I mean? So like I think. I think he didn't have a ton of, not necessarily a ton of support, but like I don't think his parents came to watch him play sports a ton. So I think he always made a point to be there for me, and I always really appreciated that.
Of course, and I feel like it becomes like a second nature thing. You appreciate the little things and you start noticing them, and then I feel like it encourages you to even do better.
Hmm.
Um, in the mental aspect, at least that what it was for me. If I saw my mom like at a basketball game, like which she I don't know, she probably watched me play like 3 times,
Hmm.
but it's like it's different when I came down here and I played basketball at Kings, and she all of a sudden watches every game online. It's like, oh, okay, well she's gonna be watching. I gotta behave.
Yeah.
So it becomes second nature.
Hmm.
Um, Now moving on, you obviously, from what I read and from what I heard, you found passion in kinesiology. That's what brought you to Acadia, and that's what you really wanted to do. It's study the the components of body recovery pretty much, and how to treat your body and become more physically athletic and stronger and better and faster and agile, and we can use a bunch of other adjectives.
Yep.
But how much did it help you overcome your own injuries, as you kind of like, obviously you have specialists that are looking at you, and um, doctors that that are giving you advice, and giving you physiotherapy exercise and all that stuff. But was there at any time that, like, something that you learned that you just kept in mind for yourself? And all, obviously, I forgot to mention, Sean recovered from three surgery. You mentioned three ankle surgeries and a torn ACL.
Mhm.
So would you mind, yeah, sharing your experience?
Yeah, man. So I would say overall, like it's definitely helped having a background of knowledge in kinesiology and in training and in physical therapy and things like that over the years. It's a lot easier to manage your own decisions on a daily basis the more knowledge you have in terms of like what you're trying to in the context of your goal, right? So let's say you want to rehab an injury or get more athletic. Like the more knowledge you have in that area, the better decisions you're going to be able to make on a daily basis. I think it's that simple, and I think a lot of athletes would probably benefit from knowing more about the body. You know what I mean? That would probably affect the decisions they make on a daily basis too. But for me, it really started when I was like 16. I really wanted to dunk a basketball, and I discovered a book called The Vertical Jump Bible by a guy named Kelly Baggett in the United States. So I got his book, I read that, and I really enjoyed that. First time I really enjoyed reading something almost. And then he had a couple other books too. One was called like No Bullshit Speed Development, very similar to the Vertical Jump Bible in terms of like the concepts that he would talk about too. And he had a website called Higher Faster Sports. They had a ton of different articles on different little things that you could do to try to improve your athleticism. So I was really into his work. And by the time I got to university, for example, like we had an intro to kinesiology course. Actually, even to backtrack a little bit, I did exercise science in grade 12. And that was the first time I really took a course where I was like, whoa, this looks pretty cool. I'm going to take this in university. And when we got to Acadia, we had a intro to kin course, and you could write a research paper. So your first ever research paper, not like anything crazy, but just a review, almost like a literature review. And they said, write it on anything. And I wrote it on the effect of post-activation potentiation on vertical jump, which is just something I had been reading about like in the previous year online and stuff like that. And that was just like my interest. So, but that's kind of like that. And it's not like super ahead of my years, but it's not something that like you're coming in as a first year and like writing about that kind of stuff for the most part. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I was already passionate about that, and I was already like into the science a little bit about that stuff. So it was a really good fit for me. And I felt like a lot of the courses I was taking, I could always pull little pieces of information to like make myself a better athlete, that kind of thing, right? So not every course was useful, and to a certain extent, like I was probably known for not going to a lot of classes, both in undergrad and in grad school. Just some of it was due to like sports and just have to miss stuff with sports, but other times too, I just felt like people have different learning strategies and things like that. So yeah, that was something I was definitely not the best at, showing up for class. But sometimes I think too, you got to figure out what the best approach is for you based on your goals, based on your circumstances, and sometimes that might mean like not breaking the rules, but maybe not like following all of the rules to a T. You know what I mean? And that's definitely something like an idea or a concept that I've found myself coming back to over the years in different degrees and different programs, is like not being afraid to kind of push the limits on some things. But in terms of lessons that I would have learned that like I pulled to my everyday life and to recover from my injuries. Honestly, a lot of it isn't necessarily what I've learned in school in the classroom. Like, yeah, it's good stuff, but a lot of it I've learned from mentors in real life, and a lot of it from other people on the internet. So one of the biggest things I'd say was when I broke my ankle at Acadia, a guy named Gary Reno, has been working in professional sports for a long time. He had a video with a guy named Kelly Starrett on the internet at the 2012 CrossFit Games, and they started talking about how icing might actually be delaying healing when it comes to a lot of injuries rather than actually helping. And at the time, rice, so like rest, ice, compression, elevation was still very common and pushed forward in the athletic therapy and physical therapy world. And they were kind of the first people to kind of have a conversation about how that might not be the best idea. And I remember getting on the phone with Gary, and he told me to buy a muscle stimulator machine for my ankle fracture because I had a lot of swelling in my ankle and I had to get rid of that swelling. And ice wasn't doing it for me, so I went to Halifax, bus to Halifax, got this little muscle stim machine at some clinic in Halifax. This guy, I remember this guy, like he's like a salesman trying to like, I'm getting this thing no matter what, you know what I mean? He's like trying to sell me on like some like pads and stuff. I'm like, whatever, I'll take it. Like, just give me this thing. It was like 100, $200, right? They don't cost much, but like to me, that's been the biggest thing. The use of a muscle stimulator to manage swelling and acute injuries. That's the biggest thing that I've experienced personally that I learned outside of school that I find works the best for an acute injury and managing that swelling and getting the swelling under control. And I find that's really like almost like the best kept secret in the industry for a lot of guys. Cause like, for example, like half the pitchers in the MLB now, they don't ice their throwing arm after a game. They use a muscle stim. You know what I mean? But if you told that to like the entire youth baseball, you know, landscape, I don't think a lot of them would know that. And similarly with like a really bad sprained ankle in the NBA, a lot of guys sometimes use, I shouldn't say a lot, but I know some will use a muscle stim to help recycle that swelling out so they can be ready to go potentially in like a day or two. But you don't know about that kind of stuff. You don't always hear about that kind of stuff, but that stuff works, man. That really works. The muscle stim is something that I tell a lot of my patients about. And if I'm working with pro athletes, I always tell them to get one because it's great to manage a lot of different, you know, injuries.
And now that you say, like, you mentioned that to some of the athletes that you work with, and you heard that some other pro athletes have done that. Um, is it something is is it something that's not told because people lack knowledge, or is it something that you think is just not being put out there on purpose? Like, do you have an idea? I know it's like a slightly off topic, but
No, no,
now it's kind of interesting what you were saying.
it's a good
I'm
question
just
because
curious.
a lot of times, like anytime something like that won't be put forth, I think it's because there's like a big financial interest in something else that's competing with it, right? But in the ice world, there's a couple of those things, but I don't think to the point where it would be a detrimental to the muscle stem. So in the ice world, for example, we got like cryotherapy chambers, we got like game ready boots, um, we got like biofreeze, like some little hands-on spray things, and then obviously like ice packs. But ice is relatively cheap, and I think that's the biggest thing is like the rice rest ice compression elevation thing has been around for so long. It's just taken a little while for it to die out. Like even the doctor who invented rice or who coined the term, Dr. Gabe Merkin in 2014, he wrote about how, hey, I was wrong about the rest part. You want to load the tissues as soon as you can with very little load, obviously, pain free. And then he also said, hey, I was wrong about ice. You don't want to delay inflammation. Anything that delays inflammation is going to delay healing. So ice or anti-inflammatory drugs maybe aren't the best call. And that, I think it's just a lack of information because I think if a lot of people knew, like, and again, just because the guy who came up with it has reversed his stance on it doesn't necessarily mean that like, hey, he's right. Because hey, if he was wrong in the first place, who says he's right about his reverse on the stance, right? So I think like we still got to think for ourselves to a certain degree. But I think if more people knew that the guy who came up with it is a little hesitant on it now, people would be a little more open-minded about it. But I just think it's been around so long. Ice is so cheap, so easily accessible. It numbs pain, so people think that it works, but it really does nothing to limit swelling or to help recycle that fluid back into the lymphatic system, which is exactly what a muscle stimulator does. It helps recycle the excess fluid back into the lymphatic system. And it helps restore circulation to the damaged tissues as well, which is what you want. Ice does nothing for that either.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting take that I definitely didn't know as an athlete. I wish I knew that before too, but it is what it is. Now, like, overcoming those injuries is obviously, like, I know a few players who had their ACLs torn or whatever ligament or bone broken. A lot of it. And in your bio, you mentioned that there were doctors that were saying it could potentially be career-ending injury, and you probably not be able to play the sports you love ever again. Um, and you're obviously not the only player who has been told that before. I know someone personally who's been in a motor vehicle accident, and was told that he'll never be able to walk again, but then ended up playing basketball for another 5 years and continues on playing.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, how much did it affect you personally, overcoming those injuries, like mentally and emotionally, as you face this, you know almost like a fake reality that you're being told, that hasn't settled yet, and but yet you continue fighting?
Hmm. Yeah, man. So I would say, like, with my ankle injury, I saw a doctor on the East Coast who's supposed to be one of the best surgeons on the East Coast. I saw him about 8, 9 months after my initial surgery, and he was telling me that, like, hey, this doesn't look great. He was talking to his one of his student interns about it, like, kind of like they're shadowing him for the day. So I'm just listening to him talk to the student about it, and he was saying, like, yeah, this is a career-ending injury for a lot of football players. And I remember at the time, like, being a football and basketball player, thinking, like, okay, well, I mean, it's not the end of the world, I guess. Like, if I can't play football, I can still play basketball. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, the doctor knows I'm a basketball player, so um, but yeah, it's like it's pretty eye opening. It's pretty big wake up call when somebody who's been in the industry, seen the injuries, and said, hey, like, a lot of people aren't coming back from this. You know what I mean? Um, it's a wake up call, man, and it tells you, like, you got to get focused. You might have to, like, you got to go all in because there's like a limited healing time. It's not like you can chill for 6 months and then be like, all right, now I'm gonna rehab. And it's like you need that initial time to, and you need to do it right in that initial time too, to regain your range of motion and things like that, etc. So just knowing that helped me stay locked in and realize that, like, hey, I gotta address all the areas of my lifestyle as well and make sure that those are in line, because sometimes just like the hour of rehab at the gym or the 2 hours of rehab a day, it's like it's not enough. It becomes like a full body thing and a full mental thing as well. So to further answer your question there, I think one of the things I learned the most going through both of the injuries is just how instrumental the mind is in the healing process. Like, something I learned and something people say is that the mind is the most instrumental factor in the healing arts. And it's part of the arts, not necessarily the science, because, like, we just don't get it, right? Like, we just don't understand why the placebo effect exists and how it's so powerful, but it's so powerful, right? Like, people oftentimes, and as a physiotherapist, we talk about this a little bit in school too. It's like people have an ache or pain arise, usually spontaneously, not like a clear mechanism of injury. And within 2 weeks, they'll usually be resolved. They'll usually be good to go and out of pain. But they'll attribute their healing to whatever intervention they chose. And it doesn't even matter what intervention they do. If they went and got physio, if they went and got massage, if they went and got needling, if they went and iced it, if they went and moved it, you know what I mean? They'll be like, yeah, I heard it. And then for a couple weeks, I did this, and now it feels better. And and that's just the placebo at work, right? It's just they believed in their intervention, and that was, helpful to their healing. So I think a lot of times it's a psychological battle to believe that, a, you can heal from whatever your injury was, no matter how bad it is. Like, I went, and it's pretty easy for me to find stories of people with messed up ankles and messed up knees. But, like, whatever you're dealing with, you can probably find a story of somebody who's dealt with it and somebody who's overcome it successfully. And some of the common denominators when it comes to those people is, like, they believe they could heal and they believe they would heal too. There wasn't much of an if factor. It was more of like when. So I found that was really interesting. These crazy miraculous healing stories, all these people believed they were going to heal. And I think that's really the most important common denominator, and something that, you can kind of see with people sometimes when they're undergoing a big injury or big surgery. You got to make sure, like, psychologically you're locked in, because our thoughts really do seep into our biochemistry, right? And our biochemistry is essentially what's gonna dictate what happens in our body at the end of the day. So it's really important to understand the impact that our thoughts can have on our physiology.
Okay, that's an interesting take. Like for me, I'm lucky enough I haven't got injured severely ever throughout my young basketball career. When I was a kid, I dislocated a finger, but that doesn't that doesn't that doesn't equal the amount of pain or rehabilitation you have to go through when you have a torn ligament in your body.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't understand the feeling of it, but I feel like the mental pressure of just like, yeah, I want to play sports kind of helps you either way. At least for me, it was like, yeah, doctor's like, oh yeah, your finger was pretty bad, so you're not gonna be able to play 2 months after you remove the cast. But I'm like, yeah, I don't care what you say. I'm just gonna go play. I'm
Yeah.
gonna live with the repercussions afterwards.
Yeah.
Um, but for you, you ended up recovering from all, obviously from both of your injuries. Had an amazing career with both, Acadia Axemen and the University of Ottawa. Went on playing pro in Armenia. Uh, First of all, what was that? What was it like to reach that level? Because everyone has a dream, but not everyone achieves it. And second of all, what was, I guess, the toughest challenge? Playing abroad in completely new world.
Yeah, man. So it was really nice to get over there and play a season professionally this past year because that was always my goal, right? To to play professional sports and kind of keep my family streak alive because everyone had played, right? So I was like, damn, I got to do this too. There's no way that I'm letting this streak die on my watch, right? Because that's always what I wanted to do as well since I was a kid. It's not like I had my parents pressuring me saying like, "Oh, you got to keep the streak alive." Like that's like I never heard that shit from my parents, right? But like for me, it was always something that made that kind of felt right, and it also kind of made my life interesting and a little more fun. Felt like I had a purpose. Felt like I had a journey. Felt like I had something to work towards. Right. Felt like I had some sort of why to overcome my surgeries and things like that. So that was really helpful psychologically, and yeah, it took me. I mean, I did a grad school obviously, which took a couple more years. So I started playing pro a little bit later than most guys, but took a year off after my last year, like with COVID and everything. And yeah, man, just kept continued to train, and my body felt really good over there this year. Like no issues with my knees or ankles at all. Like didn't miss any games or anything like that. So that was really cool, man. Just to be out on the court, feeling really good again, being able to move around out there and not have any pain. Like for so many years, I was just in chronic pain, right? So like being older now, like being 29, like playing last year, 28, and feeling really good. Like that was just a cool experience too. Like feeling better than I did when I was like 21, for example. Usually it's not the case. Usually you kind of feel a little bit worse as you get a bit older. But for me, it seems to be a bit of the opposite trend. So I'm hoping to keep that going. And Armenia in general was a fun little country, man. Like I had some cool teammates that were. It was nice to hang out with them, and the culture itself was a little bit different. Like people speak Armenian. Obviously, I don't speak much of Armenian, so that was a bit of a challenge. But the weather was really nice. Like I remember being super sunny in like February, and like everything's super cheap in terms of like food, taxis, and stuff like that. And yeah, man, definitely some good import players from different places around the United States. There was one other Canadian dude out there who had some Armenian citizenship, so he was considered a local player, and he was doing really well. And I would kick with him a little bit too. And and yeah, man, some of the Armenians were pretty good too. For the most part, it was a really good experience.
I saw you won the 3-point contest
Yeah, man.
in the league. What was that like?
So I only hit. At the time, I was leading the league, and like I ended up leading the league in 3-point percentage for the entire season at like 44%, something like that. And generally, when I'm shooting by myself, like when I shoot 25, I'm trying to hit like 20. You know what I mean? So that was kind of my goal going into the 3-point contest because you get 5 balls per rack, right? 5 spots. So I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah. And I ended up having to go first. I didn't choose to go first, but I ended up going first. I think I only got like 17 or 18, and I was like, damn, it's not going to be good enough to win. But I think the pressure got to the other guys a little bit because they were good shooters too. Like I'd seen them shoot, and some of them were just like not shooting very well. So I ended up winning with 17 or 18, and I'll take it, man. I'll take
It's like a win is a win almost. Yeah. A
it.
win in any book is a win is in every book.
Yeah, it's a little
Um,
different though with the 3-point contest, like shooting with a crowd, with the rack, like it's a different experience. So I think that throws people off a little bit.
yeah, I feel like I don't know, like back in 2016 when the Raptors hosted the All-Star game, like they had this whole event, NBA events
Yeah,
across different cities in Canada that hosted like different competitions like 3-point contests and like dunk contests, and then they had all the winners from all major cities come to Toronto and compete against each other. I remember doing something like that in Montreal, and I'm like shooting the ball off the rack is like a complete different scenario. Like you're not used to that. You're used to spotting up, catching the ball in rhythm and letting it fly, and then you just like if you're good enough, it's gonna go in. If you're not good enough, then keep working on your shot. So
yeah,
it's a different feeling picking it up off the rack.
it is. You
Um,
almost feel like you've rushed. You almost feel like you need to rush it. So something I was
and you
doing.
also have like it's timed, right? So it's like you have like a minute. I don't know how much time you had, obviously. So,
Mm,
but no, most of the times it's time. But now, so now you're done. Your last year, well, you played in Armenia.
yep.
Are you planning on going back and playing pro somewhere else, or you have other plans in mind?
Yeah, man. So I'm gonna wait and see here. Like I'm definitely staying ready to go back overseas and play pro, whether it's in Armenia again or another country. So still doing some training this off season, staying in the gym, working on my game, that kind of thing, staying in shape, trying to get more athletic still at this point. Um, but I do a lot of work too as well, like as a physical therapist and a strength coach a little bit with some basketball players, like some professional basketball players. So depending on some of that stuff, who knows? I might end up doing a little more of that, but I don't have details on that for now. But that being said, we'll kind of wait and see. But yeah, hoping to go back overseas at this point.
So what are you doing right now? I know you flew to Arizona this past week and you were training with Mariel Shiok. What's the plan with that? Are you just training guys in the States right now, or is it just something that you're doing to to train guys and get your name out there and
Yeah, so
get into that field as well?
yeah, so I've been training Mariel for most of this summer now since he got back from Turkey his past season. We were linking up in Ottawa, just training there, like 4 or 5 days a week, kind of thing. And he is preparing for the summer league with the T Wolves now. So he came down to the States. He had a workout with the Lakers as well, like a few weeks ago. So I just came down to. He flew me down to Phoenix to continue to work with him for like a week last week before he started summer league with the T Wolves. I guess today they start. So I do a little bit of that, man. I did something similar with Kevin Pangos last summer. Went down to Boise, Idaho to work with him for a week or two before he played with the Cavs that season. So those are like two NBA level guys that I've worked with from Canada. And those are the only two guys who I've done that with recently. So I'm not doing a ton of that, but a little bit of that every summer. And it's fun, man, to travel around and work with guys, who are professional basketball players and who take their craft seriously and are trying to get better and trying to learn and stuff like that, trying to work hard. So I always enjoy that stuff. And I have a history with those guys, played with or against them since I was a kid. So it's fun to reconnect with a lot of these guys too. Got another guy like Olivier Hanlon, who I just started training again in Ottawa, who's a guy I used to play Ottawa Guardsmen with. It's a lot of fun to reconnect with these guys and put in some work with these guys, especially once they're doing their thing too, man. Like these guys have been on the grind for the last like decade at least, right? So to see these guys actually make it and make crazy money playing basketball, like I love to see it. It's great to almost help contribute to that a little bit in one way or another, right? So yeah, I do that. And then in Ottawa, I do some stuff online too with like a lot of overseas basketball players. So a lot of guys during the season, maybe they don't have like a great therapist in the country or he doesn't speak English or whatever. So I communicate with a lot of basketball players just over Instagram and online and stuff like that. When they get banged up, I'll send them videos. Maybe we'll do a video call. I'll see exactly what I think is going on, show them a couple things they can work on, exercises, things like that. So yeah, I work with a lot of like dozens of overseas basketball players doing stuff like that. And then in person in Ottawa, working with basketball players, football players, a couple CFL guys, and then some general population stuff as well.
And it's the fixed up physio.
The
Is that
fixed
what it is? The
so
fixed physio. So the fixed physio is the Instagram account for Sean Stoqua. So for those who are interested of getting consultation or training or treatment, go on his Instagram page. There's a link in bio. You'll be able to get all the necessary information. Um, you know, I read some of the stuff. There's like online consultation, a free one-time consultation. Then there's treatment, online training. So for those who are looking to get a little more in shape, a little more athletic, go right ahead and follow Sean on his Instagram page. I will put the bio under the description of this video on the YouTube page tomorrow, as it will be posted. So to sum this up, first I'll ask you one more thing, but then we'll have this a rapid fire segment that I do with everyone. It's like a minute 30, uh,
Okay.
just rapid fire questions. It's pretty much this or that type
Okay.
of thing, or what
Yeah,
would
yeah.
you rather, whatever.
Cool.
But so now that you're doing, I know you're doing a little bit of everything. Obviously, staying ready to continue to play pro and at the same time training other people. Would that be the avenue that you would like to pursue and become like a full-time trainer on the highest of the levels? Would that be your goal after you're done with basketball completely?
Yeah, it's a good question, man. And I'm not 100% sure I know the answer to that yet. I'm definitely open to that, like being more of a high level basketball performance coach in the NBA with some of those guys. I think that'd be really fun. And I think that that's something that I can work up towards. And I have the skill set to do it and like the background and the knowledge of basketball and physical therapy and strength training and stuff like that. So I think that would be cool. I think part of me also really enjoys the healing aspect of it. Like I've seen you know, what it's like to be in chronic pain and to kind of like not be sure if you're going to make it back from some of these injuries and like I think I have a valuable skill set where I can help out a lot of people who are in that situation, especially because I've been there, and I think that's almost like more valuable in some ways, right, than helping. So I mean, and it's tricky, right? Because like maybe yeah, you help someone land a huge contract, like that has a huge impact, right, on a lot of people's lives. Um, but in my head, sometimes I view that as like performance, whereas there's other people who have like these health issues that could really use some help and some guidance and some hands-on work and things like that. So I'm kind of mixed between where my time is best spent, but I'm open to different things at this point. But I think it'd be cool to play basketball for another little bit and continue to do some more work online and to continue to build up my online business and continue to connect with people around the world doing online stuff.
Okay, perfect. Well, right. With that being said, we'll just jump into that segment. I'll start the timer in like uh,
Okay.
right about now. And the first question would be: now that you've been to super hot weather and super cold weather, which one do you prefer more?
Oh, hot, not even close.
Hot. So we're talking summer then, no
Yeah,
winters.
yeah.
Right. Who's your favorite basketball player all time?
Poof. So I haven't seen any film of my dad. He's the first guy that comes to mind, but I heard he was good. Heard he was a good passer. Steve Nash. I'm a big Steve Nash guy, but Steve Nash was kind of known as not a great defender. So I'm a big Nate Robinson guy because Nate Robinson played defensive back and guard at Washington. So I'm gonna go Nate Robinson. Final answer.
Okay, perfect. Would you rather win? Would you rather win if you played both sports still, the Super Bowl or the NBA championship?
Probably. Oof, great question. Probably the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl just seems like there's so much more hype. Like it's one game, like do or die. All the marbles. Probably the Super Bowl.
What's your favorite pregame meal?
Uh, so I usually eat and then take a nap. So I'll have like rice, bone broth, usually like beef or steak with like a couple vegetables, and then I'll take a nap, and then I'll get up and have some coffee with a little bit of butter in it. So that's kind of what I do pregame.
Go to pregame song.
Go get it, Ti.
What's your favorite basketball team, if you have one?
Uh, maybe my grade 12 high school team.
What about professional level?
Nah.
You know, okay. Interesting. I like this is an interesting take. I've never heard someone just say, I don't know about that.
Honestly, I don't watch a lot of NBA, man. Like I
I
don't
see.
sports in general. I don't watch a ton of sports in general. Like in terms of like being a fan of teams and following like the NBA or NFL. Like I follow the NBA a little bit, NFL not so much. But I got to roll with the Raptors, overall.
The locals.
Yeah,
And one last thing, if you were able to have a dinner with anyone from human history, dead or alive, who would it be?
yeah, it's a good question. Maybe Marcus Aurelius because
Interesting. We're going mythology and we're going Roman and Greek history. I
yeah,
like that. That's interesting.
because like I like some of his work, and it was so long ago. It's crazy how the ideas and the concepts that he writes about still apply today. So I think it'd be really fun to chat it up with him a little bit, or it'd be terrible. Who knows? Maybe
You never know.
it's all translated, right? It's not actually. It's probably written in like Greek. Who knows if he doesn't know English? Maybe that's a poor choice.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I'll roll with that.
That's interesting. I love this. Is like this is my favorite question by like far. Like I think I asked that question everyone that I've had this past year, because I only started doing that little segment this past year, and like I've had all kinds of people. I had people say um what Ed Reed, the safety.
Yeah,
Then
yeah,
I had someone say D Wade because it's like a complete biased Miami Heat fan,
right.
which is okay. Shout out to Slim, by the way. It's
Yeah.
fine. So it's like you get all kinds of answers, and they're always interesting. Like I like it,
If
but
I had a second option, and I'm not going to throw in any specific name here, but there's a ton of really cool like indigenous healers that I would love to sit down with and kind of pick their brain for a little bit about what they know and what they've seen and how they communicate it and things like that. I've read a few books by guys like that, and I'd love to actually meet them in person.
yeah, because a lot of it is, if I'm not mistaken, is spiritual, because they're really spiritual people. They believe in spirits. So, yeah, it would definitely be interesting, actually, and I'm pretty sure I would be able to like ask a few people around, like in Nova Scotia, because the indigenous community is pretty big and pretty unique. down here. So, but without further ado, I really, really once again want to say thank you for joining me today. I appreciate your time. I know you're on a busy schedule, flying from one city to another, and obviously doing online trading. I see you posting a lot of stuff on Instagram on your story. So, thank you once again. I really, really appreciate it. This episode will be posted tomorrow on my YouTube page, which is also 94 by 50 podcast. It's super easy to find. So feel free to share it with your friends, family, and whoever.
Sweet, man. Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on again. Appreciate the opportunity. This was fun. It's a good chat. Definitely share some of this online and hopefully get some of this information out there.
Yeah, 100%. So, for those who did tune in today, I really appreciate your support and thank you for joining me, whether it's for a special segment or an episode like this with people like Sean and other episodes that I've had. Um, if you are looking to find the previous episodes, make sure to go check out my YouTube page. It is 94 by 50 podcast. It is out on Facebook upon the completion of the stream as well. Also, the 94 by 50 podcast page. It's 94 by 50 everywhere except the all audio platforms that I'm still working on. But soon, all in due time. So, for those who did tune in, thank you very much. Peace, love, and positivity. Make sure to spread it. And remember to always keep it simple. Have a wonderful day.